Look, I need to tell someone this story because, honestly, everyone in my life has completely lost their minds and turned against me. I'm Chrissy, I'm 26, and I thought I had everything figured out until literally everyone decided to act like I'm the villain here. So let me start from the beginning, and you can judge for yourself whether I'm really the bad guy everyone's making me out to be. 3 years ago, I was dating this guy, Landon. He's 29 now, and we had what most people would call a normal relationship. But I was reading all these articles about how monogamy is basically just a social construct designed to control people, especially women. I mean, think about it. Why should I limit myself to one person when I could experience all these different connections and grow as a person? So I brought it up to Landon one night after we'd been drinking wine and talking about our future. I explained how evolved couples were moving beyond traditional relationship structures and exploring polyamory. I told him it wasn't about not loving him. It was about loving him enough to be completely honest about my needs, instead of sneaking around like most people do. Now, Landon wasn't immediately on board, which I totally understood. He's always been more traditional in his thinking, but he's also incredibly open-minded and trusting. That's what I loved about him from day one. He never tried to control me or tell me what I could and couldn't do. After a few weeks of conversations, he agreed to try it. He said he wanted me to be happy, and if this was important to me, he'd work through his own insecurities. The thing is, I already had someone in mind when I suggested the whole polyamory thing. Joel was this guy in our friend group who I'd been having these intense conversations with at parties. He worked in the same industry as me, so we had tons to talk about, and there was definitely chemistry there. But I wasn't going to cheat. I'm not that kind of person. I wanted to explore that connection honestly and openly, which is exactly what polyamory allows you to do. Setting up our relationship structure was actually pretty straightforward. We established some basic rules: always use protection with other partners, don't bring relationship drama home, and be transparent about who we were seeing. Landon could date other people too, obviously. I encouraged him to get out there and explore. Between us, though, he wasn't super successful at it. He'd go on dates maybe once every couple months, usually with women he'd meet through work or those dating apps. But none of them ever seemed to stick around long. Meanwhile, things with Joel were incredible from the start. We had this electric connection that was completely different from what Landon and I had built together. With Landon, everything was comfortable and stable. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our quiet nights watching Netflix. With Joel, it was all spontaneity and intensity. He'd text me at random times wanting to meet up for drinks or take late-night drives around the city. I was getting the best of both worlds: security and excitement, comfort and passion. Landon handled the day-to-day relationship stuff incredibly well. He never made me feel guilty about my other relationships or demanded details I wasn't comfortable sharing. When I'd come home late from dates with Joel or other partners, he'd just ask if I had a good time and maybe make me some tea if I wanted to decompress. The only real bump we hit in those first couple years was when I caught chlamydia from one of my casual partners. I felt terrible about it, obviously, especially since I had to tell Landon he needed to get tested too. He was upset, but not in an accusatory way. More disappointed that I'd been careless with our health. We had a long conversation about being more vigilant with protection and making sure all our partners were regularly tested. By year 2 of our open relationship, I felt like we'd really hit our stride. I was seeing Joel regularly, plus I had a couple other casual connections that would pop up here and there. Landon had settled into our routine and seemed genuinely happy with the arrangement. My friends were always asking how we made it work, and I'd explain that it just came down to trust and honesty. The arrangement worked so well because Landon and I had clearly defined roles in each other's lives. He was my emotional anchor, my partner in building a life together. We split bills, made decisions about our living space, planned for the future. Joel was more about living in the moment and exploring sides of myself that didn't necessarily fit into domestic life. So, when everything started falling apart a few months ago, I was completely blindsided. I thought we'd proven that this lifestyle could work long term. But apparently, some people just can't handle real freedom when it gets complicated. The shift started when Joel began talking about wanting to be more than just a secondary relationship in my life. He'd make comments about how we never got to do couple things together, how he wanted to meet my family, how he wished we could be more open about our relationship with our mutual friends. I understood where he was coming from, but I also had to be realistic about what I could offer him without disrupting my primary relationship with Landon. The tension came to a head at this party. Joel's friend was hosting. It was supposed to be a casual get-together, just our usual crowd hanging out, drinking, maybe playing some games. Joel had been looking forward to it all week, talking about how we could actually be ourselves around people instead of downplaying our connection. When we got there, the place was already pretty packed with our usual crowd, plus some people I didn't recognize. Someone had set up a whole bar situation in the kitchen, and there were people playing beer pong in the living room. Joel immediately started introducing me to people as his girlfriend, which felt both exciting and a little weird. We did a couple shots together, and then joined some friends who were playing drinking games. I was probably 3 drinks in when Joel suggested we go find somewhere quieter to talk. He led me upstairs to this little balcony area where we could still hear the party, but actually have a conversation. That's when he told me he'd been thinking about us a lot lately, about what he wanted our relationship to look like going forward. He said he was tired of feeling like he was competing for my attention and time. The conversation was intense, but in a good way. We talked about our feelings, our fears, what we both wanted from the relationship. Joel told me he was falling in love with me, which honestly wasn't a huge surprise, but was still amazing to hear out loud. I told him I was developing serious feelings too, that our connection meant more to me than I'd initially expected. We ended up making out on that balcony for what felt like forever. When we finally came back downstairs, we were both pretty tipsy and completely wrapped up in each other. The party had gotten even more crowded and chaotic, which was perfect because everyone was too drunk and distracted to pay attention to how all over each other we were being. By the time most people had cleared out, it was just Joel and me, and maybe 4 other people scattered around the place. The music was still playing, we still had drinks, and the energy between Joel and me was absolutely electric. We ended up on the couch together, and things started getting pretty heated pretty quickly. That's when Joel suggested we go upstairs to one of the bedrooms. Everything was amazing until we realized neither of us had brought any protection. We'd been so caught up in the spontaneity of the moment that we hadn't planned ahead. Joel said he was sure there probably had to be some condoms somewhere, but when he went to look, he couldn't find any. I know this sounds irresponsible, and looking back, it obviously was. But in that moment, with all the alcohol and emotions and physical chemistry, it felt like overthinking would just ruin what we had going. Joel said he'd been tested recently and was clean, and I told him the same thing. We'd been together for 2 years at that point. It wasn't like we were strangers taking a random risk, so we decided to just go for it. And honestly, it was incredible. All that built-up tension and emotion we'd been carrying around for months just exploded into this amazing physical connection. The next morning, I woke up at Joel's apartment feeling a little hungover, but mostly amazing. A couple days later, Joel and I ended up hooking up again, and once again, we didn't have protection handy. But after what had happened at the party, it felt like we'd already crossed that line anyway. We were both adults who'd made an informed decision about our health and safety. 3 weeks after that party, I realized my period was late. At first, I didn't think much of it, because my cycle had been kind of irregular lately due to work stress. But when another week went by without it showing up, I started getting this nagging feeling in the back of my mind that something might be off. I'd been on birth control for years, and I was pretty good about taking it consistently. Sure, there had been a few times recently where I'd taken it a few hours late, or maybe missed a day here and there, but nothing that should have caused any real problems. I finally decided to take a pregnancy test just to rule it out and give myself peace of mind. I bought one of those early detection tests and took it first thing Tuesday morning before work, expecting to laugh at myself for being paranoid. But the test came back positive. 2 little lines, clear as day, staring back at me from that stupid plastic stick. I literally sat on my bathroom floor for like 20 minutes just staring at it, waiting for the lines to disappear or change or somehow become something different than what they obviously were. I called in sick to work and spent the rest of that day just lying in bed, trying to process what this meant for my life. I had 2 men who were important to me, but only one of them was my primary partner, the person I'd built a life with. The other was someone I loved, but who wasn't necessarily ready to step into the role of co-parent and life partner. The worst part was knowing I had to tell both of them what was happening. With Landon, I'd have to admit that I'd broken our protection rule and potentially put both of our health and futures at risk. With Joel, I'd have to have a conversation about what role he wanted to play if the baby turned out to be his. I finally told Landon that Thursday night after he got home from work. I waited until after dinner, until we were both relaxed and settled in for the evening. Then I just came out with it, told him I was pregnant and that there was a chance the baby might not be his, because of what had happened with Joel at that party. His reaction was not what I expected at all. I thought he'd be angry about me breaking our protection rule, or hurt that I'd potentially gotten pregnant by another man. Instead, he just got really quiet and asked me what I wanted to do about it. When I told him I wasn't sure yet, he said he'd support whatever decision I made, but he needed to know if I was planning to keep the baby before he could figure out his own feelings. The conversation with Joel was even harder. When I told him what was happening, his first reaction was complete panic. He started talking about how he wasn't ready to be a father, how this wasn't what he'd signed up for when we decided to take our relationship to the next level. Then he asked if I was sure the baby was his, and when I explained that I couldn't be certain, he seemed both relieved and somehow more anxious at the same time. So I scheduled an amniocentesis to determine paternity. The procedure itself was terrifying. They stick this long needle through your abdomen into the amniotic sac to extract fluid for testing. The waiting period for the results was absolutely torture. When the results finally came back, I got the call while I was at work. The baby was Joel's. I remember sitting in my car in the parking lot after hanging up with the doctor, just staring at my phone and trying to process what this meant for my life. I called Joel first to tell him the news. His reaction was not what I expected at all. Instead of panicking like I thought he would, he asked if we could meet up to talk about our options. He said he'd been doing a lot of thinking over the past 2 weeks and had some things he wanted to discuss with me. When we met that evening, Joel told me he'd realized he actually did want to be a father, and if I was willing to keep the baby, he wanted to try to make a real relationship work between us. But he said he couldn't handle the complexity of co-parenting with me while I was still living with Landon. He wanted me to choose, either commit to building a life with him and the baby, or follow through on my original plan to terminate. That night, I had the hardest conversation of my life with Landon. I told him about Joel's offer and about the impossible choice I was facing. I expected him to fight for me, to tell me he'd support whatever decision I made. Instead, he just nodded and said he'd figured this might happen eventually. Landon said he'd always known that what Joel and I had was different from what we had, more intense and passionate. He said he could see how much I lit up when I talked about Joel, and while it hurt him to admit it, he could also see that Joel was offering me something he couldn't. The chance to build something completely new and exciting. What he said next completely floored me. Landon told me he thought I should go with Joel, not because he didn't love me or want to be with me, but because he could see that's where my heart was really pulling me. He said he'd rather let me go pursue what might be the love of my life than keep me in a relationship where I'd always wonder what I'd given up. So I made my decision. I told Joel I wanted to keep the baby and try to build a real relationship with him. I told Landon I was moving out, and ending our romantic relationship. And I started making plans to completely restructure my life around this new reality I was choosing. For about 3 weeks, everything felt perfect. Joel and I found a cute apartment together, started talking about baby names and nursery themes, began planning for our future as a family. I felt like I was finally living authentically, instead of constantly trying to balance everyone else's needs and expectations. But then Joel started changing. Little things at first. He'd be less affectionate, more critical of my choices, less excited about the pregnancy. When I asked him what was wrong, he'd say he was just stressed about work or tired from helping me move. The breaking point came when Joel admitted he was having second thoughts about everything. He said the reality of becoming a father was scarier than he'd anticipated, and watching me end my relationship with Landon had made him realize how easily I could walk away from commitments when something better came along. He was worried that I'd do the same thing to him eventually. I tried to reassure him that what we had was different, that I'd chosen him over everything else in my life, because our connection was real and lasting. But he said he needed space to figure out his feelings, which basically meant he was moving out of our apartment and leaving me to deal with the pregnancy alone. So there I was, 12 weeks pregnant, completely alone for the first time in years, having lost both of the men I loved because I'd tried to follow my heart instead of playing it safe. Landon had already started seeing someone new, a woman from his work who seemed perfectly nice and uncomplicated. Joel had basically disappeared from my life entirely. The worst part was that everyone acted like I'd gotten exactly what I deserved. My friends said I should have known better than to blow up my stable relationship for someone who'd never proven he could handle real commitment. My family said they'd never understood why I'd gotten involved with multiple people in the first place. I spent the next few months completely alone, working through my pregnancy without any support from either of the men who'd claimed to love me. Joel eventually reached out to say he wanted to be involved in the baby's life, but couldn't handle a romantic relationship with me anymore. Landon wished me well, but made it clear he was moving on with his life. I was about 34 weeks pregnant when Joel had been in a car accident. Despite everything that had happened between us, I still loved him and wanted to be there for him. When I got to the hospital, Joel told me something that completely shattered any remaining hope. While he'd been taking time to think about our relationship, he'd actually been seeing someone else. Someone from his work who didn't know anything about me or the pregnancy. 2 weeks later, while I was still processing everything Joel had told me, I went into premature labor. My daughter was born at 36 weeks, tiny but healthy. Joel came to the hospital with his new girlfriend. Seeing them together, watching him introduce her as his partner, while our daughter lay in the NICU, was one of the most painful moments of my entire life. The final insult came when Joel asked if he could bring his girlfriend to visit the baby in the NICU. When I told him absolutely not, he threatened to get lawyers involved if I tried to prevent him from having full access to his daughter. The last piece of my life to completely fall apart was my job. 2 weeks after my daughter was born, I got a call saying they needed to discuss concerns about my work performance. What they were really saying was that my messy personal life had become an embarrassment to the company, and they wanted me gone. They offered me a severance package in exchange for my resignation. 6 months after my daughter was born, I had to move back in with my parents because I couldn't afford to live on my own anymore. At 27 years old, I was sleeping in my childhood bedroom with a baby, no job, no relationship, and no realistic plan for how to get back on my feet. The isolation was the hardest part. I'd gone from having multiple loving relationships and a full social life to being completely alone with a baby who depended on me for everything. Even my old friends had basically disappeared from my life. A year after my daughter was born, I finally found a decent job and was able to move into a small apartment with her. Joel had mostly faded out of the picture by then. He'd see her maybe once a month and send sporadic child support payments when he remembered. His relationship with his girlfriend had gotten more serious, and they were talking about getting married and having kids of their own. Landon had gotten married and bought a house with his wife. I'd heard through mutual friends that they were trying to have a baby and were incredibly happy together. Sometimes I'd drive past their neighborhood and wonder what my life would have been like if I'd stayed with him. What I couldn't understand was why everyone seemed so satisfied by my suffering. People who'd known me for years were acting like my current struggles proved that polyamory doesn't work, that I'd gotten what I deserved for trying to have too much. As if monogamous relationships never ended badly, as if traditional choices always led to happiness and security. The truth is, I still believe in love and connection and the possibility of building meaningful relationships with multiple people. What I don't believe in anymore is the idea that following your heart will always lead you to happiness, or that being authentic and honest will protect you from devastating consequences. But I refuse to apologize for trying to live a life that felt authentic and meaningful to me. I refuse to pretend that settling for comfortable mediocrity would have been a better choice than risking everything for passionate love. And I definitely refuse to let other people's judgment convince me that I somehow deserved everything that happened to me. My daughter is 2 years old now, and she's the most amazing little person I've ever known. When I look at her, I know that whatever mistakes I made along the way, she was worth all of it. Maybe I'll find love again someday. Maybe I won't. But whatever happens, I'll know that I lived my life honestly and authentically, even when it was hard. Everyone else can think whatever they want about my life and my decisions. I know who I am and what I'm capable of, and that's enough. Because at the end of the day, I'm the one who has to live with the consequences of my choices, and I'd rather live with the consequences of trying than the consequences of never trying at all.